Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please be seated. I guess after the expose that our bishop has given, there probably would have been no need for me to say anything. He has said it all. But today we are here to give thanks, and it's always a pleasure to be here in Primaries Chapel. It's not my first time, and it won't be my last time. So I'm a stakeholder in the air conditioning project. So Bishop, rest assured that I will contribute my quota. Bishop and Mrs. Ajinasari, our national chairman of the NDC party, the general secretary, our national executives who are present here, our regional chairman for Greater Accra, our members of parliament, my fellow aspirants, and I acknowledge Honorable Alban Bagbin, who's the second Deputy Speaker of Parliament. Joshua Labi, who was my colleague in Parliament before and moved on into academia and is an emeritus Vice Chancellor. Mr. Sylvester Mensah, who is one of your own in Primaries Chapel. Al-Haji Nuruddin, a businessman who tried to veer into politics but did not succeed. I'm sure he will remain in business after this. My friend and former boss, the Honorable Spio Gabra. For those of you who don't know it, Spio was my boss. He was Minister of Communications and I was his deputy. And we've been friends and associates since then. Unfortunately, Mr. Guzitano was not able to join us this morning, but he's been with us since last week, Wednesday. We were together in a meeting at the party office. He was with us at the Muslim Thanksgiving that was held on Friday. And today, other things have taken him out of town. Members of the NDC party, my wife, Mrs. Lodina Mahama, and my brothers and sisters in Christ. I want to thank you for once again warmly welcoming us to Primaries Chapel. For most who don't know it, this is one of the architectural wonders of Accra, or should I say Ghana. It is one of the largest church auditoriums, maybe the largest, I would say, arguably. And if Bishop Ajinasari tells you about this roof you see above here, you will wonder at the architects who not only designed it, but installed it. I've never tired of hearing him talk about the Primaries Chapel roof. But let us today express our sincerest condolences to the bishop. For those of you who are aware, he has recently lost his father. And the funeral is just about a week away. And so to Bishop and Mrs. Ajinasari, please accept our sincerest condolences. His father lived and worked in Tamale, a city that I grew up myself. At the time he was in Tamale, I was a little boy in secondary school. I was writing my O-levels. And in those days, people who worked for government used to be transferred all over the country. You couldn't work in one place more than 4 or 5 years, and then you were transferred to the next place. And so for those of the people our age, it is not surprising that we speak multiple languages of this country, because wherever your father worked, you learned the language. And so for children of Bishop's age and that generation who used to go on transfer with our fathers, you learned to speak the language, and that's how come we can speak multiple languages. Today, if you transfer anybody, they refuse to go. But in those days, Ghana was one, and every part of the country you served your motherland. We're here to thank God for His infinite blessings on us, not only individually, but as a group. We're here to thank God for our party and for our country. We're here to thank God for seeing us through a successful presidential primary. Indeed, God has been good to us since 2016, after we lost the last election. I remember post the election loss, morale was very low in our party, and everybody in the party was dispirited. We had just emerged from the election and things hadn't gone well, and our party had gone into what I call the blame game mode. Everybody else was to blame for the party's loss except ourselves. And so there was a lot of acrimony and finger pointing. I came at a time and I said that as the general who led the army into battle, I accept blame for our loss. And so the finger pointing should stop. I want to thank our party executives, the outgone executives, and also the new executives for the level-headedness that was displayed from 2016 to date. The outgone executive promptly set up what we call the Kwesibochwe Committee, whose reports contained the opinions and grievances of our party supporters across the length and breadth of our country. All over the country, our supporters and stakeholders were called and asked to vent and give their opinion of what went wrong. All these were compiled into a report which was presented to the National Executive. And I must commend the outgone executive and the new executive for consistently continuing to implement the recommendations that were made by that committee after it had gone around the whole country. Since then, we have held successful branch elections, probably the most successful branch elections ever held in our party. If you see the quality and caliber of people who stood as polling station branch executives, then it gives you hope that the NDC party has a bright future. We held constituency elections, very competitive elections, and then after that we held regional elections. They were also very competitive. And last November, by the grace of God, we held our National Congress, and we successfully elected our new national officers, many of whom are here with us this morning. The climax of all this reorganization is the presidential primaries that we held almost a week ago, in which, by the grace of God, I emerged as the winner. I want to take the opportunity to thank my colleague aspirants for their graciousness in calling me the same night after the results were declared and congratulating me and assuring that they continue to remain committed members of the party and that they will work hard for the party. Indeed, their competition brought out the best in us. And I've said and I'll say again that if they had not stood, it would have meant that one candidate would have been declared unopposed. And it would not have engendered the kind of competition and journeys around the country, meeting our grassroots supporters in all corners of this country. That would not have happened if there was no competition. And so I think that that primary and the competition that took place has brought out the best in the NDC party. And we thank God for that. All across the country, I found our branch executives more determined and energized before to work hard for the party and work hard for victory in the year 2020. I want to take this opportunity to thank the Almighty God for Jenny's mercies. In the last 3 or 4 months, myself and my colleague aspirants have crisscrossed this country. In the course of the presidential primary campaign, I've been to every part of this country. There's no part of this country I did not go to. Visited all the 275 constituencies in this country. And this was done successfully without even a single hair on anybody's skin in my convoy being affected. We went and came thousands of kilometers, and everybody did so safely without any injury or without any casualty. It can only be God's mercy that put us through this. My dear Bishop, it is a happy coincidence that these thanks we are giving for the blessings bestowed on our party, the NDC, coincide with our country's 62nd independence anniversary. Indeed, we must give thanks, and we're here to give thanks, not only for our political party, but also for our country. God has been good to us, and we must say thank you to him. While, as the bishop said, we are not where we should be or where we want to be, we must thank God still for the little mercies that he has continued to bestow on us. Indeed, the bishop says, we must thank God for the journey so far. And I believe and I agree with him that at every stage in our country's life and in our own lives, we must thank God for the journey so far. As a young child, I used to enjoy the hymn, "Count Your Blessings, Name Them One by One." I used to enjoy that hymn very much because it says that if you count your blessings, then you will know what the Lord has done. And it's only when you know what the Lord has done for you that you will be thankful to him. And when you are thankful to him, he will bestow even more blessings upon you. We can thank God as a nation for the fact that we have stayed together. At independence in 1957, when this country was born, we were of different ethnic groups, and we still are of different ethnic groups. We had Gonjas, we had Fantis, we had Gans, we had Ashantis, we had Ewes, we had Nzimes, Bronx, Frafres, Kusasis, just name the different ethnic groups that we have. And these different ethnic groups were welded into one nation. And we have stayed as one nation for 62 years. It's not the same in every country. We've never had a civil war amongst ourselves. Not many other countries have been as lucky. If you go to Liberia and Sierra Leone, those of you who went after the civil war, and you saw what that country went through, you see the people whose hands were cut. They asked you whether you wanted long sleeves or short sleeves. And depending on where you said you wanted long sleeves, they cut your wrist. If you said you wanted short sleeve, they cut up to your elbow. And there are many of such people who today are handicapped because of what happened in the Civil War. For some, they gave you short sleeves on both hands. And so you had just your hands up to the elbow. And if you wanted short sleeves, they gave you short sleeves on both hands. And there are all these people who are handicapped today because God was not as bounteous to their countries. You go to Somalia, they are the same people. They speak the same language. They are not as ethnically diverse as we are. They are just clans of the same ethnic group. That means family groups. But they speak the same language. They have the same religion. They are almost all Muslim. And yet they fought for God knows how many years. God has been bounteous to us. We have not suffered the same. If you go to South Sudan, it is Africa's youngest nation. All of us applauded the independence of South Sudan. And we said this nation was going to be a model and was going to prosper the people of South Sudan. And I remember something that happened. President Salva Kiir became my friend because we used to meet at the AU conferences and in other meetings. And he took a liking for me, and so we used to discuss what we were doing in Ghana and how we had reached the stage of development that we had reached. And he said, look, I want you to pay a state visit to South Sudan. And I said, I'll gladly do that. And when you come, we will sign a memorandum of understanding to cooperate with each other. And so I agreed. And one of the things we discussed, I said, look, Ghana has 35 colleges of education, and we're producing a lot of teachers, much more than we can post. We have almost 27 nursing training institutions, producing a lot of nurses every year. And so when we come, we can sign an MOU so that Ghana will send you some teachers and nurses and other medical professionals, because they had an absolute shortage of such personnel. And so we were discussing when this state visit would take place. And while the negotiations for the state visit was taking place, the civil war in South Sudan started. You know the irony of it? I promised to send teachers and doctors and nurses. I ended up sending soldiers, because when the civil war broke out, the Secretary General of the UN called me and said, Mr. President, we need peacekeepers to go to South Sudan. Can you give me 1 battalion of your peacekeepers? Happily, we were winding down the UN operation in Côte d'Ivoire. And so I said, Mr. Secretary General, you know we're winding down the peacekeeping operation in Côte d'Ivoire. We have a battalion that we're bringing back to Ghana. And so if you want, we will offer you that battalion. He said, thank you very much. So the battalion went from Côte d'Ivoire to South Sudan to go and separate warring factions instead of sending teachers and doctors and nurses to help the development of that country. That is the sadness of some of the experiences that our sister countries have suffered. And I say this to emphasize that we must thank God for the little mercies we have, at least the peace we have in our country. Because there can be no development without peace. And so if we thank God and appreciate the peace we have in our country, it will mean counting our blessings and thanking God for our blessings, and He will bless us some more. We have religious coexistence in this country. On Friday, we were with the Muslims thanking God for His bounteous blessings on our party and our country. And today, we're all here thanking God for His mercies. that religious coexistence is something that does not exist in other countries. In other countries, you are persecuted because of your religion. In Ghana, our constitution says there shall be freedom of worship. And indeed, in our country, there's freedom of worship. People express their religious inclinations without fear that they will be molested. And so we must thank God for that blessing. It is not the same in even some of our neighboring countries. You dare to be something outside the main religion, you will be persecuted. I always give two examples. One was after the unfortunate death of our late president, Professor Ivan Sata Mills. We had gone to the Asumdwek Park to do the burial. And that day, the sun was beating down so hot. It was at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And all the clergy were there. And Archbishop Palmer Buckle, I don't know his religious title, I don't know if I think he's an Archbishop now. Archbishop Palmer Buckle was there. And the late Molvi Wahab Adam, head of the Ahmadiyya Church, was there. In addition to many other members of the clergy, it was a multi-faith thing, and they all prayed for the repose of the soul of our late president. And so while we were there, all of a sudden, Molvi Wahab Adam collapsed. I think the heat was too much, and so he suffered heat stroke. And so they called for an ambulance, and the ambulance drove and came. And Molvi was put on the stretcher and put into the ambulance. As soon as they were preparing the ambulance to go, Archbishop Palmer Buckle jumped into the ambulance and sat by Molvi, holding his hand and praying for him until they got to the hospital. You would hardly see such in some countries. A Muslim cleric falls down. A Christian cleric, what's his business? He will not even be at the same location with a Muslim cleric to say joint prayers. And so we must thank God for these little blessings. As Vice President, Professor Mills asked me to go to Bolga. He had been invited. The Muslims have this National Hilal Conference where they sit and agree on the dates to begin the Ramadan fast and when they will end and when they will say prayers. And they hold it every year. And they had invited the president to be present. And as Professor Mills frequently did, he asked me to go and represent him. And so I went to Bolga Tanga, got there in the evening, we went to bed. In the morning we had breakfast, we got ready, we dressed up, and we set off to the conference. And so while in the car driving, I said, where is this conference taking place? And it was taking place at the Catholic Social Center. I mean, the Muslim Hilal Conference was taking place at the Catholic Social Center. In many countries, if even that was the only center that they could hold that conference, the Muslims would refuse to go and hold their conference in that center. And in many places, the Catholics would not even give their center to the Muslims to hold a conference like that. But that is the blessing of Ghana. And when we say count our blessings, we can count so many of such blessings. I remember when I was president, and there was the Ebola outbreak in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. We all put in contingency plans. We started to train health personnel on how to isolate, identify the virus quickly, isolate patients. We started to educate our population on how to disinfect their hands, avoid unnecessary handshakes and all that. I remember in all our churches, now we've stopped. We used to put disinfectant at the door, and then people will come and disinfect their hands before they come in. Today, by the grace of God, that disinfectant is no longer there. And at the time, the Ebola was so grievous, it killed 13,000 people in those 3 countries. And I was chairman of ECOWAS. And as my duty as chairman of ECOWAS, I had to visit the 3 countries and solidarize and tell them the rest of ECOWAS is with them. I flew to Liberia first, and to Sierra Leone, and then on to Guinea. I met the presidents there. You could see they had had sleepless nights. There were bags under their eyes. I mean, I remember President Koroma especially. He's got this gray hair, and he always keeps it very nice and trim. His hair was disheveled. He had forgotten to even comb his hair. And you could see they were tired. All the airports were like graveyards. Every plane that could fly was gone. And they had canceled all flights to those countries. And so the only way I could get there was with our presidential jet. I remember the trauma these countries went through. And in Ghana, we said intercessory prayers in all our churches and said, God should pass us over from this pandemic, from this scourge. And you can't believe what happened. There was somebody who flew from Liberia. He was going to Nigeria. The plane touched down in Ghana, and passengers descended from the plane, and the plane continued to Nigeria. This passenger had the Ebola virus, and there was an outbreak of Ebola in Nigeria. There was a very brave female doctor who died because she was infected by the patient, and a few people died as a result of that patient's infection. And yet God gave us a Passover. Despite all the preparations we made, that virus did not enter Ghana. And these are the little blessings that we tend to forget. And we become such cynics that we believe that our country is a basket case and that our country can never become better than it is. But, like I said, we must count our blessings, because it's only when you know that the cup is half full, then you realize that you need only another half to fill the glass. But if your mind tells you the cup is half empty, then your idea of filling the glass is even much bigger than if you say it is half full. If it's half full, it means you're halfway there. But if you say it's half empty, then you get the impression that you need even more water to be able to fill the glass. And so, let's discard our sense of national cynicism. Indeed, it's disheartening when you listen to our discourse on our radios and on our TVs. You think that this country is worse than any other country in this world. And indeed, you think that our country is a something whole, as some president described some of our countries to be. But if we have a sense of national optimism, and that is what has made those countries reach where they are, because the generations that worked to make their countries what they are had the hope that their countries will be better based on the sacrifices that they were making. And so a generation, if you look at the history of any country, there's a generation in the history of that country that sacrificed to make the country reach where it has reached. And so in Ghana, we need to make that generational sacrifice if our country is to have a bright future for our children and great-grandchildren. We must eschew deviousness from our politics. There was a case in which, in the Third Republic, some politician was happy that his party had won, and he said the trick in his constituency that made them win was they went around telling the opposition supporters that they were voting the next day. It's like, let's say NDC and MPP. So you go and tell the MPP supporters that, oh, on the election day, it's for NDC. And that the next day, they'll bring fresh ballot boxes and the MPP too will come and vote. And that's the new electoral system that they have brought. So on that day, and in those times, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have all those gadgets. If you had a radio in your station, it was GBC 1 and GBC 2. The one with the wire they connect to the pole outside. And so if you go to the village spreading this, they will believe that, yes, it's true, one party is voting today, the next party is voting the next day. So on the day of the election, the other party said, oh, it's these people's turn. Ours is tomorrow. They were preparing for tomorrow. And tomorrow came, no ballot boxes, no electoral officials. And so he won, and he was happy. That is deviousness. And so let's eschew deviousness from our politics. And as Bishop said, our country is politically polarized. Our partisanship is too extreme. And that is part of the reason for our forward, one step forward, two steps back. One step forward, two steps back. A new government comes into power, and everything the previous government did is wrong. We inherited a mess. We did this. This didn't happen. If they had done this. And so we continue to pass the buck and pass the blame instead of taking the good things the previous government did and continue and build on it. We keep looking back for 2 years, playing the blame game, and by the time you see the next election is right in front of you. And so, yes, we are polarized, and our partisanship is extreme. I want to assure Bishop that NDC as a party would uphold the peace of this country. I can boldly assert that as leader of the NDC party, it will not be because of NDC that this country will burn. And that is why we have accepted the President's invitation to discuss the issue of vigilantism. And we actually have written explaining some of the issues we think we need to look at, including what Bishop said, that it will be simplistic to just have the two parties come and sit together and say, we're discussing and disbanding vigilantism. The issue of vigilantism is a multi-stakeholder thing. And Freddie Blade just calling Ofosuampofo and say, oh, let's meet tomorrow. We can have some tea and discuss disbanding our vigilante groups. No. And that's why we're saying there must be an interlocutor, a neutral interlocutor. And the neutral interlocutor that we have in this country, in terms of our peace architecture, is the National Peace Council. We must have had disagreements with the chairman. And it was in the heat of post-Ayawaso West Wogon. The chairman had been interviewed. And in a way, when I listened to the audio, the presenter misled him in many ways. If you listen to that audio again. And so on our side, we said, but as chairman of the Peace Council, the first thing you must do is to condemn the violence first. Then after that, now you look at what who said or what who didn't say. But without condemning the violence, the presenter asked, he says, so what of President Mahama, what he said, boot for boot, will you condemn it? The Peace Council chairman said, I haven't heard what he said. And the presenter said, oh, I can tell you on assurance, he said it. And that there are witnesses, we can even bring the audio and play it to you. Then the Peace Council chairman said, if he said it, then I think he was wrong. Then he pushes him again. So does he owe an apology to the nation? And he says, well, as an ex-president, if he said that, then I believe that he owes the nation an apology without condemning the violence. That was our problem. If you had condemned the violence and then you commented on what the former president said, that would be acceptable. So in the circumstances, of course, I mean, for a chairman who had witnessed the violence, the guy whose leg was shot, the bone had shattered and the bone fragments were lying on the ground. Anybody who saw it would be traumatized. And so if a few days after he was talking and saying we should attack the Peace Council chairman, it didn't mean we should go and beat the Peace Council chairman. It meant that we should criticize him verbally. But we have written a letter to the president, and we say the National Peace Council is the best organization to preside over the talks on disbanding vigilantism, because we believe in the peace architecture and we believe in the National Peace Council. We don't have a problem with the National Peace Council. So we have suggested that the Peace Council should be, and that all the clergy, the stakeholder clergy, should be part of that discussion, and that we should have the security organizations as part of that discussion. And so we have sent our proposals back to the president, and I'm sure that if this is structured properly, then we can address the issues of vigilantism. Indeed, vigilantism is in two parts. There's the ordinary macho men Bishop Ajinasari referred to, who parties used to go and recruit to protect their ballot boxes. These were Azoka boys, Bamba boys, Boku boys, and things. And the police had control of them. If they misbehaved, the police used to arrest them, go and lock them up, and release them after 5, after we finish voting. Or they wait and let us finish counting, then they release them. Vigilantism was taken to a new level when people started training them to shoot and close combat. If you remember, as president, I deported 3 South African mercenaries who had been brought into this country to train party vigilantes. That is the start of the militant vigilantism that we're seeing. And the question we're asking is, yes, we can talk about disbanding vigilantes. And so the two parties say, okay, we don't have vigilantes anymore. But the question is, those people who did what they did in Ayahuasca West Wuogon are national security operatives. They have moved from the party vigilantism into our security service. So the question is, what do you do with those people? Because on election day, they will have the clothes of security services, and yet they are party vigilantes. And so you trust that they will keep the peace in a certain area, but they are partisan vigilantes. And so if they see that things are not going well, they can create the same commotion that they created. And so these are all questions that will be asked and must be answered when this conference takes place. But I can assure you, NDC is going to go into that conference in good faith, and is going to give our everything to make sure that the objectives of that discussion are upheld. And so, Bishop, I want to end by assuring you that we will work diligently to promote the transformation of this country to the benefit of our children and our children's children. And I want to thank you and to assure you that your sermon is like the seed that has fallen on fertile ground. And it will grow and it will bear fruit. At every stage of our journey, we will remember to give thanks. And at every stage of the journey, we will remember to remain small. Because as the Bible says, if you humble yourself, I will lift you. And so we'll remember to remain small. And above all, and my final sentence, is that we will remember that all power belongs to God. Thank you very much.